What is up, everyone? My name is Deshaun, and we are back with another Yap Sesh. Today, we are going to be talking about Superman. But before, little housekeeping. I am in the new space. I recently moved, and I think I said previously in another video, I do have a podcast name. But at the moment, obviously because of the move, I was not able to, push anything for it. But I'm working on something. I really am. I promise. I have a name. I'm trying to get a. I don't think I'll actually be in a position to actually have my own space just yet, but we'll see. But yeah. So Superman was really good, but I'm conflicted, and I'll explain. I'm a little bit conflicted about Superman. I'm not gonna lie, but I think I think it has a little bit to do with the effect that the trauma that has come with not the Spider-Verse, the Snyderverse, and like I said, I'll get into it. But off the dome review, or not really off the dome, but after sitting with my thoughts and seeing Superman, I'm gonna say it honestly was an 8 out of 10. I'll say I think that's good. I've seen people rate it like a 10 out of 10, a 9 out of 10. I'm not there yet. I'm gonna be honest. I'm not there because my first thought when walking out of the movie theater was, I know some people won't share this opinion, but for me, it was, did I like Man of Steel just a little bit more? And I know a lot of people are not going to agree with that sentiment, but me and my brothers and my dad, we actually liked Man of Steel. I'm the type of person, bro, something's good. There's a lot of things that were good to me as a kid and as a young adult, and then once you get online and people talk about it, realize that they hate it, and it's like, oh, um, okay, I that's new. Another thing I can think of is what's it called? Banana Laffy Taffies. Those are my favorite as a kid, but for some reason people hate them. I did not know until I grew up that people hated Banana Laffy Taffies. Anyways, it made me feel like I was watching a comic book movie again. And I say that because, I was 12 when Avengers came out. I was 13 when Man of Steel came out. I watched the first Iron Man. I was 8 years old, right? So those, Iron Man, the Avengers, Man of Steel, those are pretty formative years for me, like 8 to 15. There's a lot of comic book stuff happening at that time. And so for me, it like you get this nostalgic feeling of watching these movies for the first time, and I feel like over time that starts to dwindle down just a little bit because I don't want to say it's a fatigue, but you kind of get desensitized to comic book movies just a little bit. They in a sense start to become just movies in a way, and I don't know if that's really a good thing or a bad thing, but watching Superman brought that superhero, the comic book on screen feel back, and I think it had a lot to do with the way it was shot as well. Like it's not as like a desaturated not pastel, but kind of like a monochrome look that came with the Snyderverse. It's not as dark and as gritty. It's campy. It's saturated. The colors have life, and I really like that, and I hope. I'm sure he will, but I hope that James Gunn continues that trend because to me, when you look at a comic book, not a lot of times are you getting these super desaturated images. Like a lot of, especially earlier in the golden and silver age comics, I mean, even still today, obviously, but there's the comic books have life. When you see older, you see early depictions of Superman, Batman, in I don't want to get the decades wrong, but in the early 21st century, I'll just say, when you see the first versions of Batman and Superman on TV, it's skinny dudes in these super campy outfits. And I feel personally, that's realistically what comic book movies should be. Now, obviously with technology and, the practicality of some superhero outfits and costumes and things like that, things look better made differently. But at the same time, I don't necessarily believe that we have to get away from that. And obviously, you can accredit, Dark Knight, the first Iron Man, to these things, the failure that was the Green Lantern movie. And so I understand why we went into a darker side of comic books. And I don't necessarily think that that was a bad thing, right? Because I'll get to it later, but I don't necessarily think that was a bad thing. And so I like, and I hope that we kind of do make this transition back into a more campier, a more lighthearted version of comic books, because that's really how they started off. Obviously, with the X-Men coming to the MCU, things will get a little darker, I feel like, which is, like I said, is okay. I think there needs to be a balance. I think if you are moving towards a Young Avengers, that could be more lighthearted. You get to the X-Men and it's like, okay, this is a little darker, and I think there can be a balance. I think there can be both. I think if you think about a character like, obviously Batman is going to be darker than, something like the Flash. I mean, you've seen the contrast in the CW shows. The Flash has its moments, but for the most part, it's a lot lighthearted, more lighthearted. I don't know. It's lighter than a show like Arrow, for example. So I think the duality exists, and I think it can exist. But for the most part, I feel like in the overall scheme of comic book movies, it's been mostly dark, right? So it's nice to see someone like a Kamala Khan on screen who is a lot lighthearted, and you see how dark Captain Marvel is, and there's a contrast, and I hope that contrast continues to grow and it's just not one-sided, which is really what I'm trying to say. And so I mean, you had that a little bit in the Snyderverse, like with you had like the Batman v Superman and stuff, but then you had like Shazam, and that was a lot lighter of stories versus Batman v Superman. So it existed, but I hope that it continues to exist more. Anyways, I want to talk about comic book accuracy, because I don't know, as someone who wants to be a filmmaker, as someone who is a filmmaker, not necessarily in the narrative sense, I shoot weddings and things like that. I don't necessarily care about comic book accuracy. I don't. I understand why people complain about it, but if I'm being completely honest, when people talk about comic book accuracy, especially online, it kind of just feels like people use it as an excuse to hate on things, and they don't necessarily really care about continuity and comic book accuracy. They just use it as an excuse to say, oh, this isn't as good as I wanted it to be because I read a comic book. And the way I kind of look at, comic book movies and stuff like that, they are adaptations, right? So they don't need to be 100% accurate. And I believe at least that directors, writers, people who are telling these on-screen stories should have the autonomy to change things the way they see it and the way they feel, because they are artists too. And so I think when you lean on the crutch of comic book accuracy, you're kind of taking away the privilege of the filmmaker to make their own decisions and tell the story how they want to tell it. And so I kind of look at comic book movies as, I guess, like Elseworld or like multiverse stories that don't necessarily have to completely align with what the comic book is. Like, the comic books are the source material, and there's so much source material to go on. Things have to get condensed. Things have to change. There is a practicality to filmmaking that the rules don't apply to when you're writing or drawing a comic book. And so I personally don't take offense or care about comic book accuracy, because the comic books still exist. If you want or care about comic book accuracy, go read the comic books. Now, obviously, there are people who are going to hear that and disagree, and I personally am not going to be offended, or I'm not going to be upset if you disagree. I know there's people who are going to be upset by hearing that, who are going to disagree, but I don't. Like, I understand why people want comic book accuracy. I understand why people have a problem with comic book accuracy. It's just me. I don't necessarily care, because I still have the comic books as source material that I can go back and read and I can go back and enjoy, right? Like, I grew up reading Percy Jackson. I grew up reading Harry Potter. Like, I know that there are not everything in the Harry Potter movies are verbatim what happened in the books. I mean, and I know I've watched the Percy Jackson show. I've seen the Percy Jackson movies. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happened in the books that didn't show up in the movies, and I can still appreciate the Harry Potter, not the Percy Jackson movies, because the Percy Jackson movies were bad. The Percy Jackson movies were pretty bad, but I can appreciate the Harry Potter and to some extent the Percy Jackson movies for what they were, and not necessarily completely disregard them, because they are different and they're not exactly what the books were, but they exist. And I'm a visual person. Like, I got into this to be a visual person, so obviously I'm going to or at least should, I feel like we should have some appreciation for the visual art. And to complain about everything because it's not what you read kind of takes away from the visual art. That's just me, but I understand it and I get it, but I just don't share the same sentiment. I do apologize. I want to talk James Gunn because there's this like screenshot of a tweet. It's like James's pen is undefeated, because apparently people are just finding out that he directed the Scooby-Doo movies, which is crazy. But obviously I understand that not everyone keeps up with who directed what, so it makes sense. But it's interesting to see in real time on like TikTok and other social media apps, people are finding out that the guy who wrote Superman, the guy who wrote the Guardians of the Galaxies, also wrote Scooby-Doo. So I like it. It's pretty funny. It's pretty amusing to see. But I love James Gunn. In my opinion, he's probably the best like director in the comic book genre. I just think he knows how to adapt. He knows how to tell a story. I will say, when speaking of story, this is where I get into the Snyderverse. I think the story of Man of Steel, in my opinion, is better. Or at least the plot of Man of Steel is better. And I know it's going to make people upset. I know. I understand why Man of Steel is not a good superhero movie or a good Superman movie, but I think I know people are gonna disagree, so it's really tough to say. But I don't know. There's elements of Man of Steel that I did like better than this movie. I think I will say that I feel like the tension was better in Man of Steel. The tension between Superman and Zod, and the tension between, I guess, like humanity choosing Superman as their hero, it's better shown in Man of Steel. You see the military like truly oppose Superman, right? Like, you see humans like have to choose Superman a little more than you do. And I think it's one of those things of when I think about when I think about like Sam Raimi Spider-Man versus Tom Holland Spider-Man, right? Like, you see people like on the street talking about Superman or Spider-Man, sorry, and you see the guy, I believe it's Spider-Man 3, or he's like, it's definitely Spider-Man 3, because it's when he goes black suit. And he's like, my kids used to love Spider-Man, and now with the black suit and he's doing all this crazy stuff, like, I don't know. And so I don't necessarily see that or saw that as much in a Superman, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think there's not as much feeler for how people are feeling about Superman. And I kind of understand why, because it's Superman year 1 versus Superman year 3. And so it makes sense. But I don't know. I can just, there's more tension in the relationships in Man of Steel, which I personally like more. But overall, I would say, context included, Superman is the better film. But I don't know. There's just something about Man of Steel for me personally that just I don't know. Maybe it's just nostalgia. I don't know. I probably need to go back and watch Man of Steel, and maybe my opinion will change. But I don't. I'm not a Man of Steel hater. That's all I'm gonna say. Back to James Gunn. I'm really am. This movie makes me excited about what he's going to do with his DCU. I mean, I have trust in James Gunn. Like, I can't watch the 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I can't watch Peacemaker and this movie and, you know, have second guesses about what James Gunn's preferences, James Gunn's ideas at this point in time. Like, James Gunn just doesn't miss. Like, it is what it is. So I got nothing for you. But what I do want to talk about is the future of the DCU. And obviously James Gunn is like anti MCU. Post-credit scenes had nothing to do setting up any future projects other than the slight Millie cameo of Supergirl. But other than that, like, he's committed to being anti MCU, and I respect it. I really do. As some, obviously, and as someone who was like in the machine of the MCU at one point in time, it makes complete sense for him to have an opinion on being trying to be the complete opposite, and I genuinely love it. I do want to talk about Robert Pattinson's Batman because it seems to have a lot of controversy at the moment. It's taken Matt Reeves a really long time to write the script. I don't know if I believe that, to be completely honest. I don't want to get completely conspiratorial, but I think the Batman script has been done for a while, and I think they're just kind of, I think they're waiting for audience reception of this movie to make a decision about Batman, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, because as someone who loved the first Batman, I'm going to be completely honest. After watching Joker 2, I don't know if I really want a second Batman. I know it's different. I know it's a different writing room. I know that it's a different process. But I personally at this point would be okay without a sequel. It's been enough years now where I think that Batman could sit alone. But also, I think so many people love Robert Pattinson as Batman that we have to see him on screen again. But with that, I don't necessarily know that it has to be in the DCU, but I can understand why people want him in the DCU, because I feel like as James Gunn and DC prepare, you know, their slate for the next few movies, I understand why Robert Pattinson's Batman should be in the DCU, because as a company, I feel like you're doing yourself a disservice. If you have this beloved actor playing this character already, why not just continue it? But at the same time, as a filmmaker, I feel like Matt Reeves should have his freedom to do what he wants. Like, he made a banger, and if you make a banger of a film, you should be allowed to explore that further. And The Penguin, really great show. So I feel like the world that's been built out in this else world of a story, it should be allowed to be completely fleshed out. People love the Penguin. People love the Batman. Like, I don't necessarily know if I want it in the DCU, but at the same time, so many people love this character at this point. It's like, you gotta see it through somehow. And so, I mean, I saw a comment. Can't remember if it was on YouTube or TikTok, but it was someone basically saying that they think that it would be interesting, or they want Robert Pattinson's to kind of just like jump back and forth a little bit. And I think that would be interesting to see. Maybe if he's like shows up in a project here and there, but kind of just sticks to his own thing. If you introduce the Flash, who I want to talk about next, I could see a scenario where the Flash does some world hopping and, you know, come and grabs Pattinson's Batman for a conflict, and you know, he kind of goes back once it's done, like a Crisis or a Justice League thing. I don't know. But at the same time, I feel like if you are going to do a Justice League movie, you have to have your own Batman. So that's kind of something you got to figure out. I just, it's tough. It's really tough because part of me feels like it's unfair to Matt Reeves to just steal his Batman from him. But at the same time, as you know, the head person of DC, you got to make a decision, James. So I guess we'll see. We will see. Speaking of the Flash, I'm almost gonna cry. I'm gonna cry because I want Grant Gustin to be the Flash so bad, so bad. He absolutely deserves a chance to be James Gunn's Flash. And honestly, so for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe it's because of my age, but I just thought Grant Gustin was so older than he actually is. He's only 35. And David Cornsweet's 32. So they're 3 years apart. I don't know how old Robert Pattinson is. I imagine he's around that same age as well. Even if he's slightly older than Grant Gustin, like that, there's a decent amount of time in between, or a decent what am I trying to say? Age gap where it could work. And so I understand that, you know, Jay Garrick, Barry Allen, Wally West, I believe, are all confirmed to be canon in the DCU already. And so if you're going off of age, if Wally West is going to be your Justice League Flash, Grant Gustin being 35 should be okay. Because if your Wally West is 25 and your Batman's and your Superman, if your Superman's in his 30s, your Flash is in his 30s, and your Batman's in his 30s, your Wally West is probably going to be in his 20s anyway. So it kind of makes sense for Grant Gustin to be the Flash at this point. I'm getting too excited. The Flash started in 2014, I believe. I could be wrong. Maybe 2014. I'm pretty sure 2014. I could be wrong. 2013, maybe 2013. But anyways, I started high school in 2014, right? So this is like, so peak CW is my entire high school career. So like the love and care I have for Grant Gustin's Flash is a little different than most people. But, or at least I shouldn't even say most people, because most people my age love Grant Gustin's Flash. So I don't know. You got to get John Wesley Shipp in a Flash suit one more time. You have to at this point. Like it just makes sense. But no, I really want to see Grant Gustin as the DCU Flash. I hope it happens. I'm praying. James and Grant been like this on Instagram, so they've been locked in, bro. They've been locked in on Instagram, so hopefully we get something from it. But no, in all seriousness, the Flash is my favorite superhero. The Flash and Spider-Man are my favorite superheroes. So having an actor that is beloved by me and other people who I know it to be true. Sorry, my dog is he's chilling. I don't know if you guys can hear him, but I heard him. So I absolutely would love to see Grant Gustin's Flash in the DCU. As far as Batman goes, I'm gonna be honest, I would be perfectly fine with Robert Pattinson's Batman being in the DCU, but if he does stay in the universe that he's in, I see a lot of people talk about what's the actor's name? Reacher. Can't think of his name. Alan Richmond, Tommy Richmond, Alan something. I think he would be a good Flash or Batman. Sorry. I'm not a big fan of Batman either, to be completely honest. So as long as the actor's jacked, as long as he's tall and handsome, I'm sure he'll be great. Before I get out of here, I just want to say thanks for watching. If you made it this far in the video, Superman was really good. I'm excited to see what James Gunn has next. This is experience was a ride. I need to go see it again and again. I can't wait till it's on Max to watch it again. It really made me feel like a kid again. It genuinely did. I felt like I was watching Justice League Unlimited, or the Brave and the Bold TV show. Like, I'm excited to see Brave and the Bold on screen, because it was one of my favorite animated shows growing up. I just had fun. That's at the end of the day, I had fun. Like, that's my number one takeaway from this movie is I had fun watching it. My wife cried watching Krypto get stolen from Superman. That was funny to see. She is pregnant, so I can't say too much, but it was a good time, and that's what I want from my movies. That's what I want from my comic book movies. That's what I want from new adaptation, new scripts, new original stories. Like, I just want to go to the theaters and have fun. And that's what I expect from James Gunn. That's what I hope to see in this DCU. And I mean, I'm ready. I'm ready to go see DCU character or not DCU. I'm ready to see DC characters on screen and have fun. That's why I want to see Grant Gustin's Flash. That's why Robert Pattinson's Batman would be okay with me. But I'm sure Alan Rickman, I think that's his name, Richmond. I'm gonna feel bad because after I'm done, I'm gonna find out his actual name and how to say it. But I think it's Alan Rickman. I don't know, but I'm sure he'll be great on screen. I've seen him in so much stuff. I'd be perfectly okay with him being Batman. I'm just ready to have fun again. And this movie was a breath of fresh air. And let James cook. That's my final words is let James cook. Peace. Thanks for watching.